The heat bore down on Violet Reed's shoulders as she stood on the rough wooden platform in the center of Spokane, Washington, her hands trembling despite her best efforts to appear calm. The year was 1883, and the frontier town bustled with miners, ranchers, and men whose eyes held either pity or something far worse as they gathered around the auction block where she stood like livestock waiting to be sold. Her father's debts had brought her here, debts she never knew existed until the creditors came calling 3 weeks after his death, and now she faced a fate she had only read about in cautionary tales whispered among proper women back east. The auctioneer, a rotund man with tobacco-stained teeth and a voice that carried across the dusty street, began his practiced speech. "Gentlemen, what we have here is a fine specimen of womanhood. Violet Reed, age 22, educated, can read and write, cook and sew. Her father's debts total $600, and whoever pays that sum takes responsibility for her indenture for a period of 5 years." Violet's stomach churned. 5 years. 5 years of servitude to whatever man decided her worth. She scanned the crowd, recognizing some faces from the general store where she had worked briefly after arriving in Spokane with her father 2 years ago. Most looked away when her eyes met theirs, unwilling to acknowledge the horror of what was happening. Others leered, and she forced herself to look past them, to focus on the mountains in the distance, to imagine herself anywhere but here. "Do I hear $100 to start?" The auctioneer's voice boomed. A hand went up near the back. Violet's heart sank as she recognized Jonas Mercer, the owner of the Lucky Strike Saloon, a man known for working his girls until they were hollow shells of themselves. $100 from Mr. Mercer. Do I hear 150? Another hand, this time from a rancher whose wife had died the previous winter. At least that might mean cooking and housework rather than the alternative, but the man's reputation for a harsh temper made her knees weak. 200! Jonas Mercer's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. Violet closed her eyes, praying for mercy from a God who seemed to have forgotten her entirely. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat trickled down her spine beneath the simple cotton dress that had once been her Sunday best. Now it was the only decent thing she owned, everything else having been sold to partially pay her father's creditors. 200 going once, the auctioneer called. She thought of her mother, dead these 10 years, and wondered if the woman would recognize her daughter now, standing on an auction block like property to be bartered and sold. Shame burned through her worse than the summer heat. 200 going twice. Violet opened her eyes, resigned to her fate, when a voice rang out from the edge of the crowd, deep and steady. $600. The crowd fell silent, then erupted in surprised murmurs. Even the auctioneer looked shocked, his gavel frozen midair. Violet strained to see who had spoken, and the crowd parted slightly to reveal a tall figure leading a dappled gray horse toward the platform. He was a cowboy, that much was clear from his worn leather chaps, dusty boots, and the Stetson hat that shaded his face from the brutal sun. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. Broad shoulders, a lean build that spoke of hard work and sparse meals, and a face weathered by sun and wind but still young, probably no more than 26 or 27. His jaw was set with determination, and his blue eyes held something she had not seen in any other face in the crowd that day: respect. $600, he repeated, his voice carrying easily despite not being raised. Cash money, paid in full right now, and I want the papers of indenture torn up. I am buying her debt, not her service. The auctioneer sputtered. Now see here, that is not how this works. The debt transfers to you, and she serves the term to work it off. The cowboy's expression did not change, but something in his stance shifted, became more dangerous, despite the casual way his hand rested near his hip. I said I want the papers torn up. I pay the debt in full, right here, right now. She walks away free and clear. That is my offer. Take it or I walk away, and you get whatever pittance these other men are willing to pay. Jonas Mercer pushed forward. That is not legal. The terms were clear. The terms were that her father's debt needed to be paid, the cowboy said calmly. I am paying it. What I choose to do after that is my business. Now, do we have a deal or not? Because my offer expires in about 30 seconds, and I have got better things to do than stand around arguing with a man who makes his living off the misfortune of others. The auctioneer looked at Jonas Mercer, who had gone red in the face, then back at the cowboy. Money was money, and $600 was more than they had hoped to get. Fine, but she still needs someone to take responsibility for her. A woman alone is not proper. I will take responsibility, the cowboy said, as her employer. I need a cook and housekeeper for my ranch. She can work for wages, same as any other employee. Fair wages, paid monthly, with room and board. She is free to leave whenever she chooses. Violet found her voice for the first time since being forced onto the platform. I do not even know your name. He looked up at her then, and she felt the full weight of his gaze. There was kindness there, mixed with a weariness that spoke of his own hard-won battles. Preston Garrett, madam. I run a cattle ranch about 10 miles north of here. It is not fancy, but it is honest work, and you would be treated with respect. Why? She asked, needing to understand. Why would you do this? Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify. Because no woman should be sold like cattle, and because my mother once told me that how a man treats those who cannot defend themselves shows his true character. I would like to think I am honoring her memory. The auctioneer, sensing the crowd's mood shifting and eager to complete the transaction, rapped his gavel. Sold to Preston Garrett for $600, with terms as stated. Mr. Garrett, if you will come settle the payment, we can complete the paperwork. Preston tied his horse to the hitching post and climbed the steps to the platform, pulling a leather pouch from his vest. Violet watched as he counted out the money, each gold coin representing months of hard work, and felt something twist in her chest. This stranger was bankrupting himself to free her, and she did not even know why. When the transaction was complete and the papers signed and properly destroyed as Preston had insisted, the auctioneer grudgingly gestured for Violet to step down. Her legs had gone numb from standing so long in the heat, and she stumbled on the first step. Preston's hand shot out, steadying her with a gentle grip on her elbow. Easy, he said quietly. You are safe now. She looked up at him, at this man who had just changed the entire course of her life with a handful of gold coins, and felt tears prick her eyes. I do not know how I will ever repay you. You do not owe me anything, he said firmly. You are free, Miss Reed. Free to walk away right now if you want. The job offer is real if you want it, but it is your choice. Violet looked around at the crowd dispersing, disappointed at the lack of drama. She looked at Jonas Mercer's retreating back, at the other men who had been ready to bid on her like property, and then back at Preston Garrett with his honest eyes and worn clothes. She had nowhere to go, no money to her name, and winter would come eventually to the Washington Territory. But more than practical concerns, something in her gut said this man could be trusted. I accept your offer, she said quietly. When do I start? A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she had seen. How about after we get you something to eat? You look like you have not had a proper meal in days. He was right. The creditors had taken everything, including the last of her food, and pride had kept her from begging. That would be kind of you. Preston led her to his horse and helped her up onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. Violet stiffened at the proximity, but his touch remained respectful as he reached around her for the reins. There is a decent restaurant on the other side of town. We will get you fed, pick up some supplies, and head out to the ranch. It is about a 2-hour ride, so we should get there before dark if we do not dawdle. As they rode through Spokane's dusty streets, Violet became acutely aware of the solid warmth of Preston behind her, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait, and the curious stares of townspeople who had witnessed the auction. She held her head high, refusing to show shame. She had done nothing wrong. Her father's gambling debts were not her fault, and she would not let this day define her. The restaurant was a simple establishment with checkered curtains and the smell of fresh bread wafting through the door. Preston helped her down and led her inside, where a matronly woman with flour-dusted hands greeted them warmly. Preston Garrett, as I live and breathe, I have not seen you in town for near a month. Who is this young lady? This is Miss Violet Reed, Mrs. Henderson. She is going to be working as my housekeeper and cook out at the ranch. We would like two of whatever you have hot and ready. Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened slightly, recognition dawning. She had clearly heard about the auction, but to her credit, she simply smiled warmly at Violet. Well now, that is wonderful news. Preston here has been living on beans and hardtack for far too long. You sit yourselves down and I will bring out some beef stew and biscuits. They settled at a corner table, and Violet realized she did not know what to say. The enormity of what had just happened was beginning to sink in, and her hands shook as she folded them in her lap. Preston noticed and pushed a glass of water toward her. Drink, he said gently. You have had a shock. She obeyed, the cool water soothing her parched throat. Mr. Garrett. Preston, he corrected. If we are going to be working together, we might as well use first names. Formality gets tiresome out on a ranch. Preston, she tried again, tasting the name. I need you to understand something. I am grateful, more grateful than I can express, but I will not be anyone's property. If you have expectations beyond housekeeping and cooking. His expression hardened, but not with anger, with something that looked like pain. I give you my word, Violet, that I will never lay a hand on you in any way you do not welcome. You are my employee, not my possession. You will have your own room with a lock on the door. You will be paid fair wages, and if you ever want to leave, I will bring you back to town myself and give you enough money to start fresh somewhere else. The sincerity in his voice broke through her defenses, and she felt the tears she had been holding back all day finally spill over. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed, but Preston simply handed her a clean handkerchief and looked away to give her a moment to compose herself. Mrs. Henderson arrived with 2 steaming bowls of stew and a basket of golden biscuits. Here you are, dears. You eat up now. The food was the best thing Violet had tasted in weeks, and she had to force herself not to wolf it down. Preston ate steadily, clearly hungry himself, and they sat in companionable silence for a while. When she finally pushed her empty bowl away, feeling almost human again, he looked at her with curiosity. Can I ask what happened? With your father's debts? Violet sighed, the story painful but no longer raw. My father was a good man, but he had demons. After my mother died, he started drinking, and with drinking came gambling. We moved to Spokane 2 years ago because he heard there were opportunities, but really he was running from debts back in Portland. He found work as a bookkeeper, and I thought maybe things were getting better. Then he caught pneumonia last winter and died within a week. I did not know about the gambling debts until men came to the boarding house where we lived. They took everything, but it was not enough. The law said I was responsible as his only heir. That is a hell of a thing, Preston said quietly. Inheriting debt, but not assets. The law is not kind to women, Violet said with more bitterness than she intended. I am sorry. I should not complain to you. You have been nothing but kind. You have every right to be angry, Preston said. What happened today was wrong. I am just glad I had the money to stop it. Violet studied him across the table. This cowboy who had saved her from a fate she did not want to imagine. That was your entire savings, was it not? What you paid today? He did not deny it. I will earn it back. Cattle prices are good this year, and I have a decent herd. It is just money. It is not just money, she said firmly. It is security. It is your future, and you spent it on a stranger. Preston met her eyes, and for a moment, something passed between them, some understanding that went beyond words. Some things are more important than money, Violet. You will understand when you see the ranch. It is not much, but it is mine, and that is worth more than any amount of gold in a bank. They finished their meal and stopped at the general store, where Preston bought basic supplies, including fabric for new dresses for Violet, insisting that she would need work clothes appropriate for ranch life. The proprietor, a thin man with spectacles, accepted Preston's credit without question, which told Violet that the cowboy's reputation was solid in town. As they loaded the supplies onto Preston's horse and a pack mule he had left at the livery, Violet felt the curious stares of townspeople and held her head high. Let them look. Let them gossip. She was free, and that was all that mattered. The ride north took them through rolling hills dotted with pine trees and the occasional ranch. Preston pointed out landmarks and neighboring properties, keeping up a steady stream of comfortable conversation that helped ease the tension from the day. He told her about the ranch, about the 100 head of cattle he was building his herd from, about the 2 ranch hands who worked for him during busy seasons but were currently away working on a cattle drive to help earn money. So it will just be the 2 of us? Violet asked, suddenly aware of the impropriety. For now, Preston confirmed. Jack and Tom will be back in a month or so. I know it is not entirely proper, but you will have your own space in the house. And the nearest neighbor is Mrs. Abigail Chen, a widow who runs a horse ranch about 3 miles east. She is a good woman and will be happy to have another female neighbor. I will introduce you tomorrow if you like. The sun was lowering toward the horizon when they crested a hill and Preston pointed ahead. There, that is home. Violet looked and felt her breath catch. The ranch house was modest, a 2-story structure of weathered wood with a wide porch and a stone chimney. It sat in a valley with a stream running nearby, surrounded by pastures where cattle grazed in the golden evening light. Outbuildings included a barn, a chicken coop, and what looked like a bunkhouse. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. It is beautiful, she said softly, and meant it. Preston's voice held quiet pride. My father built the house 20 years ago. He and my mother homesteaded here when Washington was still wilder than it is now. They built something good from nothing. I am trying to honor that. They are gone? Violet asked gently. Father died 5 years ago, kicked by a horse. Mother followed 2 years later. Her heart just gave out one night in her sleep. I think she was ready to be with him again. There was grief in his voice, but also acceptance. They rode down to the ranch in the gathering twilight, and Preston helped her down from the horse before unloading the supplies. The house was quiet as he opened the door and led her inside, lighting lamps as he went. The interior was neat, but clearly lacked a woman's touch. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a fireplace dominating one wall and simple furniture arranged practically rather than artfully. A ladder led up to what Violet assumed was a loft, and a door on the far wall was closed. That is my room, Preston said, nodding toward the closed door. Yours is upstairs. It was my parents' room, and it is the bigger of the 2. I moved into the smaller room after Mother passed. There is a bed up there and a dresser. Not fancy, but clean. He lit a lamp and handed it to her. Why do not you go get settled while I take care of the horses and bring in the rest of the supplies? There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash up. Violet climbed the ladder carefully, the lamp casting dancing shadows on the walls. The room at the top was indeed simple but clean, with a large bed covered in a faded quilt, a sturdy dresser, and a small window that looked out over the valley. Someone, presumably Preston, had swept recently and left wildflowers in a jar on the dresser. She set the lamp down and sank onto the bed, the events of the day finally catching up with her. This morning she had woken in a cell at the marshal's office, facing a future she could not bear to imagine. Now she was in a quiet room in a ranch house employed by a man who had asked nothing of her except honest work. Tears came again, but this time they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope. She let herself cry, quietly so Preston would not hear, until the well was dry. Then she washed her face in the basin, straightened her dress, and climbed back down the ladder to see what she could do to help. Preston was hauling in supplies and looked surprised to see her. You should rest. It has been a long day. So it has, Violet agreed. But I would rather be useful. Tell me what needs doing. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. How about you start some coffee while I finish with the horses? There is a pump out back for fresh water, and the coffee is in the tin on the shelf. I will show you where everything is properly tomorrow, but that will do for tonight. Working together, they put away supplies, and Preston fried up some salt pork and eggs for a simple supper. They ate at the rough wooden table, both exhausted, and Violet found herself studying her new employer in the lamplight. He had removed his hat, revealing dark hair that needed a trim, and the lines around his eyes spoke of many hours squinting into sun and wind. His hands were calloused and scarred from hard work, but his movements were careful and precise. You are staring, he said without looking up from his plate, but there was amusement in his voice. Violet felt her cheeks heat. I apologize. I was just thinking that I do not know anything about you except that you are kind and own a ranch. Not much more to know, Preston said with a slight smile. I am a rancher. I work from dawn to dusk most days. I do not drink much, do not gamble at all, and I try to be fair in my dealings. What else matters? It matters that you spent every dollar you had to save a stranger, Violet said quietly. That matters very much. Preston was quiet for a long moment, pushing food around on his plate. Finally, he said, My mother was not always a rancher's wife. She came from a good family back east, but she fell in love with the wrong man. When she got pregnant, her family disowned her. She ended up in a situation similar to yours, facing indenture to pay her way west. My father met her the day before the auction and offered her a different choice. He offered marriage, respect, and a chance at a real life. She said yes, and they had 37 good years together before he died. Understanding dawned, and Violet felt her throat tighten. So you were honoring both your parents today? I suppose so, Preston said. Also, it was just the right thing to do. No more complicated than that. They finished eating in comfortable silence, and Violet insisted on washing the dishes despite Preston's protests that she should rest. The simple domesticity of the task soothed her, gave her something normal to focus on after the abnormality of the day. When the kitchen was clean, Preston banked the fire and checked the locks on the doors. I will be up before dawn to tend the animals and check on the herd. You sleep as late as you need tomorrow. We can work out a proper schedule once you are settled. Thank you, Violet said, the words inadequate for everything she felt. For everything. Preston nodded, then paused at the door to his room. Violet, I meant what I said earlier. You are safe here. You are free here. Do not ever forget that. I will not, she promised. That night, Violet lay in the big bed under the faded quilt and looked out the window at the stars scattered across the black sky. She thought about the auction block, about Jonas Mercer's leering face, and the auctioneer's bored tone. She thought about Preston's calm voice saying $600, about the way he had insisted on tearing up the indenture papers, about his kindness in feeding her and bringing her to this place. Most of all, she thought about the look in his eyes when he had told her about his mother, about the pain there mixed with determination. Preston Garrett was a good man in a world that did not always reward goodness, and she vowed to herself that she would work harder than she ever had before to prove herself worthy of his faith in her. Sleep came eventually, deep and dreamless, and for the first time in months, Violet Reed felt safe. She woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and pale light filtering through the window. For a moment she did not remember where she was, then everything came rushing back. The auction, Preston, the ranch, her new life. Violet rose quickly, washed and dressed in her worn dress, then hurried down the ladder. The house was empty, but fresh coffee sat warming on the stove, and a note lay on the table in neat handwriting. Good morning. Help yourself to breakfast. I am checking the south pasture, and should be back by mid-morning. Make yourself at home. If you need anything, fire 3 shots from the rifle above the door, and I will come running. Preston. Violet smiled at the practical thoughtfulness, poured herself coffee, and set about exploring the kitchen properly. The pantry was surprisingly well stocked with basics, though she noted the lack of anything requiring delicate baking or creative cooking. Preston clearly ate to survive rather than for pleasure. She found eggs in the coop outside, gathered them carefully while the hens fussed at her, and made herself a simple breakfast. Then she set to work cleaning the house properly, something it clearly needed. Dust had accumulated in corners, windows were grimy, and the floor had not seen a proper scrubbing in far too long. By the time Preston returned, leading his horse and looking dusty and tired despite the early hour, Violet had transformed the main room. Windows sparkled, the floor gleamed, and fresh wildflowers picked from along the stream brightened the table. Preston stopped in the doorway and stared. I did not expect you to work today. You should be resting. I rested plenty, Violet said firmly. Besides, I needed to do something useful. This is my job now, is it not? Your job, yes, but I do not expect you to work yourself to exhaustion on your first day. He hung his hat on a peg and moved to wash his hands in the basin she had filled. The place looks better than it has in years, though. I appreciate it. It is a good house, Violet said. It just needed some attention. Now sit down, and I will make you a proper lunch. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Preston worked the ranch from dawn until dusk, checking on cattle, mending fences, tending to the endless list of tasks that came with ranching. Violet threw herself into her role as housekeeper and cook, finding satisfaction in bringing order and comfort to the home. She baked bread, mended Preston's worn clothes, planted a small vegetable garden near the kitchen door, and generally made the ranch house a home again. They ate their meals together, and slowly, conversation came easier. Preston told her about ranching, about the rhythms of the seasons and the challenges of building a herd. Violet told him about her childhood in Portland, about her mother's love of books, and her father before the drinking took hold. They discovered shared opinions on politics, a mutual love of the mountains, and a similar sense of humor that led to easy laughter. On the 4th day, Preston rode with her to meet Mrs. Abigail Chen, the neighboring widow. Mrs. Chen was a woman in her 50s, with quick eyes, a practical manner, and a ranch full of beautiful horses. She welcomed Violet warmly, clearly delighted to have another woman nearby. I am so glad Preston finally got some help, Mrs. Chen said over tea in her neat kitchen. That boy has been working himself into an early grave, trying to do everything alone. And between you and me, she lowered her voice even though Preston had stayed outside to look at the horses. I am glad it is you. I heard about what happened in town. Preston did a good thing. He did, Violet agreed quietly. Mrs. Chen studied her with knowing eyes. He is a good man, that one. His parents raised him right. But he has been lonely since they passed. This ranch needs life in it again. Violet felt her cheeks warm but said nothing. It was too soon to examine the feelings that were beginning to stir every time Preston smiled at her, or their hands accidentally touched while passing dishes at dinner. A week became 2, and summer deepened into the hottest part of the year. Violet grew tanned from her garden work, and her hands developed calluses from housework and helping Preston with minor ranch tasks. She learned to milk the cow, to churn butter, to preserve vegetables for the coming winter. Preston taught her to ride his gentler horse, insisting that she should be able to get to Mrs. Chen's or into town on her own if needed. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink, Preston said quietly, "You have settled in well here." "I have," Violet agreed. "Better than I expected. This place feels like home already." "I am glad," Preston said. "You have made a real difference. The house feels alive again." They sat in companionable silence, and Violet found herself acutely aware of Preston beside her, of the space between them that seemed both too much and not enough, She had never felt this way about a man before. This combination of comfort and excitement, of safety and anticipation. "Preston," she said softly, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Why have you never married?" "Mrs. Chen said you have owned this ranch for 5 years since your parents passed. Surely you have had opportunities." Preston was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I suppose I never met anyone who felt right. Ranching is hard work, and I would not want to trap a woman in this life if she was not suited for it. And after watching my parents together, seeing how they truly loved each other, I did not want to settle for less than that. I would rather be alone than be with someone I did not love completely." Violet's heart beat faster. That is a romantic notion for a practical man. He turned to look at her, and in the fading light, his eyes held something that made her breath catch. "I am more romantic than I look, I suppose. What about you? Never been married?" "There was someone once back in Portland," Violet admitted. "Before my mother died. He was a clerk in my father's office, and I thought I loved him. But when things got hard after Mother's death, when Father started drinking and our circumstances changed, he disappeared. I realized then that what I felt was not love, just the idea of love. Real love does not run when times get hard." "No," Preston agreed quietly. "It does not." Their eyes met and held, and Violet felt the air between them charged with unspoken possibility. But Preston looked away first, clearing his throat. "It is getting dark. We should head inside." The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, some acknowledgement of feelings growing beneath the surface of employer and employee, of savior and saved. Another week passed, and the feelings only grew stronger. Violet found herself watching Preston as he worked, admiring the strength in his shoulders and the gentleness in his hands when he handled the animals. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he always made sure she ate enough, the careful respect with which he treated her. For his part, Preston seemed to hover closer, finding excuses to be near her. He brought her wildflowers from the pastures, fixed things in the house that were not quite broken, and sat longer over meals just to talk. Mrs. Chen noticed when she visited one afternoon to bring Violet some fabric for a new dress. "You two are dancing around each other like nervous colts," she said bluntly. "Why do not you just admit you care for each other?" "It is not that simple," Violet protested, though her burning cheeks gave her away. "He saved me from the auction. I work for him. There is too much complication." "Life is always complicated," Mrs. Chen said sagely. "The question is whether you are going to let that stop you from being happy. That boy has been alone too long, and you light up like a candle whenever he is near. Do not waste time, Violet. None of us are promised tomorrow." That evening, as Violet was preparing supper, Preston came in earlier than usual, his expression troubled. "We need to talk," he said. Violet's stomach dropped. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong exactly, but Jonas Mercer came by the south fence today. He is claiming that the auction was not legal, that I should not have been allowed to tear up the indenture papers. He is threatening to take it to the territorial judge." Fear shot through Violet. "Can he do that? Can he take me back?" "No," Preston said firmly, moving to her side. "I will not let that happen. But we need to be smart about this. I talked to Mrs. Chen on my way back, and she suggested something that would end this permanently." "What?" Preston took a breath, his eyes searching hers. "We could get married. As my wife, you would be legally protected. No one could touch you. I know it is not romantic, and I know it is asking a lot, but I want you to consider it." Violet stared at him, her heart pounding. "Marriage is not something to be entered into lightly." "I know that," Preston said quietly. "But Violet, these past few weeks with you here have been the best I have had in years. You make this place feel like a home. You make me want to come inside at the end of the day instead of working until I drop." I care about you more than I probably should given the circumstances. I am not asking you to love me. I am just asking you to let me protect you the only way I know how. You care about me? Violet whispered. Preston stepped closer, his hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. I do. More than I should. More than I meant to. I know you might not feel the same way, and that is all right. But if you would consider marriage as a practical solution, I promise I will spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy. Violet leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. You foolish man. Do you really think I have been cooking your favorite meals and mending your shirts and watching you from the window every morning because I am a dedicated employee? Hope flared in his eyes. Violet! I care about you too, she said, feeling tears prick her eyes. I did not mean to. I told myself it was gratitude or admiration or anything but what it actually was. But Preston, I think I started falling in love with you the moment you said $600 and demanded they tear up those papers. I just did not think you could ever see me that way. How could I not? Preston asked, his voice rough with emotion. You are beautiful and strong and brave. You make me laugh. You make me want to be better. I have been trying not to care about you because I did not want you to feel obligated, but Violet, I am failing miserably. She laughed through her tears. So we are both fools then. The best kind of fools, Preston agreed, and then he was kissing her, gentle and careful at first, then deeper as she pressed closer. It felt like coming home, like the missing piece she had not known she needed, finally sliding into place. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. Was that all right? I should have asked first. It was more than all right, Violet assured him. It was perfect. And yes, yes, I will marry you. Not because Jonas Mercer is making threats, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up here every morning and work beside you and argue with you about whether we need more chickens and grow old watching our children play in that stream. Preston's smile was radiant. Children, you have been thinking about this. Maybe a little, Violet admitted, feeling her cheeks heat. Have you? Maybe more than a little, he confessed. I have been imagining what it would be like to have you here permanently, to not have this be temporary. I have been imagining teaching our son to ride or watching our daughter help you in the garden. I know it is early for such thoughts, but I cannot seem to help it. Then let's make it real, Violet said. Let's get married and have the life we both want. They rode into Spokane the next morning and went directly to the church, where the minister was happy to perform the ceremony with Mrs. Chen and her ranch foreman serving as witnesses. Violet wore a simple dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her alter, and Preston wore his best shirt with his hair neatly trimmed. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston's kiss was tender and full of promise. They filed the marriage certificate at the courthouse, making sure Jonas Mercer would know that Violet was now legally Violet Garrett, beyond his reach or any other man's. The clerk congratulated them warmly, and word spread through town quickly. By the time they stopped at the general store for supplies, half of Spokane seemed to know about the wedding. Congratulations, Preston, the store owner said warmly. I always knew you would find the right woman eventually. You got yourself a good one here. I did, Preston agreed, his hand finding Violet's and squeezing gently. The best. They rode back to the ranch in the afternoon sunshine, both giddy with the reality of what they had done. Violet was a married woman now, with a husband who loved her, and a home that was truly hers. It seemed impossible after the nightmare of the auction, but here she was, happier than she had ever imagined being. That night, Preston carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests, and they consummated their marriage with tenderness and growing passion. Preston was careful and attentive, making sure Violet felt safe and cherished, and she responded with her whole heart. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Preston's bed, which was now their bed, talking quietly about the future. I want to expand the herd next year, Preston said, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her arm. With you helping, I can manage more cattle. In a few years, we could have one of the biggest ranches in the area. And I want to expand the garden, Violet said. Maybe we could sell vegetables in town. And I have been thinking about getting more chickens so we could sell eggs too. Look at us, planning like an old married couple already, Preston teased, kissing her forehead. We are a married couple, Violet reminded him. As of this morning, best decision I ever made, Preston said seriously. I love you, Violet Garrett. I love you too, she replied, and kissed him again, marveling at the fact that she could do so freely now, that this incredible man was her husband. The weeks that followed were blissful despite the hard work. They fell into new rhythms as husband and wife, sharing not just meals and tasks, but dreams and fears and quiet moments of affection. Preston taught Violet more about ranching, and she proved to have a natural talent for handling cattle. Together, they worked from dawn to dusk, building their life side by side. Jonas Mercer tried one more time to cause trouble, showing up at the ranch with two hired men and demanding to speak to Preston. Violet watched from the porch, her hand on the rifle Preston had taught her to shoot, as her husband faced down the saloon owner. My wife is not your concern, Preston said flatly. She never was. The debt was paid legally, and we are married legally. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the territorial judge. But I am warning you now. If you set foot on my property again, I will treat you as a trespasser and act accordingly. Jonas Mercer looked at Preston's calm face and the rifle in Violet's hands and apparently decided the fight was not worth it. He left and never returned, and word filtered back through Mrs. Chen that he had given up his claim, realizing public opinion had turned firmly against him. As summer faded into autumn, Violet discovered she was pregnant. She told Preston one evening over supper, watching his face transform from confusion to wonder to pure joy. A baby, he breathed. We are going to have a baby? In the spring, Violet confirmed, her own joy bubbling over. Are you happy? Preston stood so quickly his chair fell over, then pulled Violet into his arms and spun her around carefully. Happy? I am the happiest man alive. We are going to be parents. They spent the evening making plans, Preston already worrying about everything from whether they needed a bigger bed to how they would manage the ranch work once the baby came. Violet laughed at his anxiousness and assured him they would figure it out together. That is what we do, she reminded him. We figure things out together. Winter came to Washington Territory with snow that blanketed the ranch in white silence. Preston worked tirelessly to keep the cattle safe and fed, and Violet kept the house warm and welcoming. Her belly grew round with their child, and Preston treated her like she was made of glass, constantly worrying that she was working too hard. I am pregnant, not dying, she finally said in exasperation one day when he insisted she sit down after she had been on her feet for less than an hour. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I am fine. I know, but you are my woman, Preston said, his hand gentle on her swollen stomach. I just want to take care of you. You do take care of me, Violet assured him, covering his hand with hers. Every single day. But you have to let me live my life too. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly with Mrs. Chen, exchanging simple gifts and sharing a feast Violet had prepared despite Preston's protests. The older woman had become like a mother to Violet, and she was thrilled about the coming baby. This ranch needs children again, she said warmly. Your mother-in-law would be so happy, Preston. She always wanted grandchildren. I wish she could have met Violet, Preston said quietly, his arm around his wife's shoulders. They would have loved each other. She knows, Mrs. Chen said firmly. Wherever she is, she knows her son is happy and her grandchild is coming. That is enough. Winter finally gave way to early spring, and with it came the return of Preston's ranch hands, Jack and Tom. They were good men who had worked for Preston's father, and they welcomed Violet warmly and congratulated Preston on his marriage. "About time you found yourself a wife," Jack said, a grizzled man in his 50s. This place was getting too quiet. With extra hands to help, Preston was able to spend more time with Violet as her pregnancy advanced. He was there when she felt the first kick, his face full of wonder as he felt his child move beneath his palm. He was there when her back ached, rubbing it until she felt relief. He was there reading to her on evenings when she was too uncomfortable to sleep, his voice soothing her until she drifted off. When her labor started on a warm April morning, Preston rode for Mrs. Chen while Tom's wife Sarah, who had arrived with the ranch hands, stayed with Violet. The birth was long and difficult, and Preston paced outside the bedroom door, terrified and helpless. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby, and Mrs. Chen opened the door with a tired smile. "You have a son, Preston, and your wife is asking for you." Preston burst into the room and found Violet propped up in bed, exhausted and pale, but glowing with joy as she held a tiny bundle wrapped in soft cloth. She looked up at him with eyes full of love. "Meet your son," she said softly. Preston approached on shaking legs and looked down at the tiny red face, at the small fists waving angrily, at the miracle he and Violet had created together. "He is perfect," he breathed. "You are both perfect." "What should we name him?" Violet asked. Preston thought for a moment, then said quietly, "What about Matthew? It was my father's middle name." "Matthew Garrett," Violet said, testing the name. "I love it. Hello, Matthew. Welcome to the world, little one." Preston sat carefully on the edge of the bed and put his arm around Violet, the three of them together for the first time as a family. He thought back to that day in Spokane, to the auction block, and the decision that had changed both their lives. It seemed like a lifetime ago now. "Thank you," Violet said softly, as if reading his thoughts, "for saving me, for loving me, for giving me this life." "Thank you for saying yes," Preston replied, kissing her forehead, "for taking a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than sense, for making this house a home, for giving me a son, the first of many adventures," Violet said with a tired smile. "The very best adventure," Preston agreed. The years that followed were full of hard work, joy, challenges, and triumph. Matthew grew into a strong, curious boy who followed his father everywhere and helped his mother in the garden. 2 years after Matthew came a daughter they named Elizabeth Rose, with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. 3 years after that came another son, James, who was quieter than his siblings but had a gift with animals that amazed even Preston. The ranch prospered. With Violet's help managing the household and contributing her egg and vegetable sales, and with Preston's careful stewardship of the herd, they expanded until the Garrett Ranch was one of the most successful in the region. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, though they kept the original structure as a guest house and a reminder of where they had started. Jonas Mercer's saloon eventually closed after he was caught cheating at cards one too many times and was run out of town. Violet heard the news and felt only pity for the man who had tried to buy her like property. Her life had turned out far better than his, and that was justice enough. Mrs. Chen remained a close friend and beloved surrogate grandmother to the children. She taught Violet more about horses, and eventually Violet began breeding them alongside Preston's cattle operation, creating another source of income for the family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston took Violet back to the spot where the auction block had once stood in Spokane. It was gone now, torn down years earlier, and in its place was a school. "Look at that," Preston said, his arm around his wife's waist. "Something good came from something bad." "Everything good in my life came from that day," Violet said, leaning into his solid warmth. "If I had not been standing on that block, you would not have saved me. we would not have met. We would not have our children, our ranch, our life together. I would like to think we would have found each other somehow, Preston said. Some things are just meant to be. Do you ever regret it? Violet asked. Spending all your money on a stranger? Taking on the responsibility of a wife when you could have stayed free and independent? Preston turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. I have never regretted it for one single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Violet Garrett. You and our children and the life we built together. That $600 was the best investment I ever made. Violet laughed through happy tears and kissed him there in the middle of town, not caring who saw. They were respectable ranch owners now, pillars of the community, but they were also still the cowboy who had taken a chance and the woman he had freed. They watched their children grow. Matthew took over more of the ranch work as he got older, showing the same dedication and integrity his father had always demonstrated. Elizabeth became a teacher at the very school that stood where the auction block had been, educating a new generation of children. James became a veterinarian, using his natural gift with animals to help ranchers throughout the territory. As Washington became a state in 1889, Preston and Violet stood on their porch watching the celebration fireworks in the distance, reflecting on how much had changed since that day in 1883. We have come a long way, Violet said softly, her head on Preston's shoulder. We have, he agreed. From an auction block to this. Sometimes I still cannot quite believe it. Believe it, Violet said firmly. We built this life with our own hands, with hard work and love and faith in each other. We earned every bit of happiness we have. Preston pulled her closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. They were older now, with silver threads in their hair, and lines on their faces earned through years of sun, wind, and laughter. But the love between them had only deepened, grown richer and more complex with every shared sunrise and weathered storm. When their children married and had children of their own, Preston and Violet became the beloved grandparents who told stories of the old days and spoiled the grandchildren with affection and homemade treats. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love and partnership. On their 30th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends, Violet stood and raised her glass. 30 years ago, I stood on an auction block in Spokane, facing a future I could not bear to imagine. Then a cowboy I did not know paid my price and set me free. But he did not just free me from debt. He freed me to love, to build, to dream, to become the woman I was meant to be. Preston Garrett is the best man I have ever known, and every day with him has been a gift. So here is to 30 more years, my love. Here is to the life we built and the love that sustains us still. Preston stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her to the cheers and applause of their family. Here is to the woman who made me whole, he said when they finally parted. To Violet, who took a chance on a cowboy and made all his dreams come true. I love you more today than I did 30 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. As the celebration continued around them, Preston and Violet slipped away to their favorite spot, a bench Preston had built on the hill overlooking the ranch. They sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, their hands linked as they had been for 3 decades. No regrets? Preston asked softly. Not a single one, Violet confirmed. You? Only that I did not meet you sooner, Preston said, kissing her knuckles. But I will take the years we had and be grateful for everyone. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, each thinking about the unlikely journey that had brought them here. From an auction block to this moment, from strangers to soulmates, from desperate circumstances to a life rich with love and family and purpose. The ranch house below them glowed with light and laughter as their family celebrated. Cattle lowed in the distance. The stream babbled its eternal song, and two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances held each other close, grateful for every moment of the beautiful life they had built together. As they finally stood to return to the celebration, Preston pulled Violet back for one more kiss. Thank you for saying yes that day, for trusting me, for building this life with me. Thank you for seeing me on that auction block and deciding I was worth saving, Violet replied. Thank you for giving me not just freedom, but love. Always, Preston promised, for as long as I live. They walked back to the house hand in hand, their hearts full, their love enduring. The auction block was long gone, destroyed and replaced by progress, but its legacy remained in the family that had sprung from that one moment of courage and compassion, in the ranch that thrived through hard work and dedication, and in the love story that would be told to grandchildren and great-grandchildren for generations to come. The cowboy had paid her price and set her free, and in doing so, he had freed himself to love and be loved in return. Together, they had built something beautiful from the ashes of despair, proving that even the darkest moments could give way to light if you had the courage to reach for it and someone willing to reach back. Preston and Violet Garrett lived long lives filled with purpose and joy. They saw Washington Territory transform into a state and continue to grow. They saw their children succeed and their grandchildren thrive. They saw the West become a little less wild and a lot more civilized, though they always kept a piece of that pioneer spirit alive in their hearts. When Preston finally passed away at the age of 82, surrounded by his family with Violet holding his hand, his last words were of gratitude for the life they had shared. Violet mourned him deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built together, and in the knowledge that they had loved each other completely for over 50 years. She lived another 5 years after Preston's death, spending her days gardening, spoiling great-grandchildren, and writing down the story of how a cowboy had saved her from an auction block and given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. When she passed peacefully in her sleep at 87, she was laid to rest beside Preston on the hill overlooking the ranch, where they had spent so many evenings watching the sunset together. Their story became part of the family legacy, passed down through generations. The ranch remained in Garrett hands, a testament to the foundation Preston and Violet had laid. And every time a new generation heard the tale of how their ancestors met, they marveled at the courage it took for Preston to spend everything he had to save a stranger, and at the faith it took for Violet to trust a cowboy she did not know. It was a love story born from adversity, forged in hard work, and sustained by mutual respect and deep affection. It was proof that sometimes the worst days lead to the best outcomes, that kindness can change lives, and that true love, once found, endures beyond even death itself. The auction block was indeed no place for a lady, but it was the place where two souls found each other against all odds, and from that unlikely beginning bloomed a love that lasted a lifetime and created a legacy that would endure for generations. Preston Garrett had paid Violet Reed's price and set her free, but in doing so, he had found his own freedom too, the freedom that comes from loving someone completely and being loved just as completely in return. Their story ended not with sorrow, but with satisfaction, with the knowledge that they had lived fully and loved deeply. The ranch they built stood as a monument to their partnership. The family they raised carried on their values, and the love they shared remained a beacon of hope, proof that even in the hardest times, in the wildest places, love could not just survive, but thrive and create something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. In the end, the cowboy and his lady were not just a story of rescue and gratitude. They were a story of true partnership, of two people who found in each other exactly what they needed and built a life that honored both their dreams. They were proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that love, real love, was always worth fighting for, worth investing in, worth building a life around. As the seasons continued to turn over the Garrett Ranch, as new generations worked the land and raised their own families in the house that Preston built and Violet made a home, the story of the auction block and the cowboy who paid the price lived on. It was told around dinner tables and at family gatherings, a reminder to each new generation of Garretts where they came from, what their ancestors had overcome, and the power of love to transform lives. The auction block was long gone, but its legacy remained in every Garrett who heard the story and understood that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually the doorways to our greatest blessings. Preston and Violet had walked through that doorway together, and in doing so, they had created something that would outlast them both, a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West and destined to be remembered forever.